All right, so let's start with a simple one. This idea of ladies football. So in the development of soccer, or what is known in the United Kingdom as football, from 1890 to 1920, men's and women's football were exactly the same. They were pretty equivalent. You can see here in this image of this game is that there's a really big attendance at this ladies football match. And in fact, ladies football had the equivalent or identical numbers to men's football. So what you would see is the same number of spectators at a men's match as a women's match. But again, as I said in the introduction, 1919 in the United Kingdom, women win the right to vote. And now women win the right to vote. Now that's changing society. But there are some areas in society where the white men still have control. And one of them is in the Football Association. So the English Football Association was a group of, I believe it was 10 men at the time. And what they did in 1921 is they said suddenly, after the development of the game for 30 years from the 1890s into 1920, 1921, suddenly 2 years after women win the right to vote, now suddenly the game of football is unsuitable for females and ought not to be encouraged. So this is what they come out with, and they basically outlaw women's football from 1921 onwards. And really there's no explanation given other than it's unsuitable for females. And so when the English FA, or the English Football Association, that's the governing body for soccer or football in England, when they suddenly come out with this pronouncement, that basically ends all of these women's football teams. And that means that all of the clubs that would have had women's football or ladies football at the time, they shut down the program. There was no longer opportunity. Okay? Now, if we flash forward to the 1990s, so that video is just a short clip of the Women's World Cup final in 1999. And what you can see there is that there is not really a sense that women's football doesn't have enough fans. That was the Rose Bowl, so there was 100,000 fans there. It didn't have the drama or the excitement of the men's game. I went to penalties, and you saw, one save. Sure, she left the line a little early there, but Brianna Scurry made an outstanding save. And then up steps the last penalty taker for the U.S. And in a very, very famous moment, she scores the final goal, rips off her top and swings it around. And it was really this impassioned win that really got the Women's World Cup back in running. There's beautiful video on I think it's on Netflix on the role of soccer. And one of the things is Japan versus the USA in the women's teams, and the development of those two programs and how that brought back women's football. And really what it shows is that given the right opportunities, the women's game is going to be equal to the men's game in many ways. So there's not anything there that's showing us, oh, this is something where we obviously say, oh, the women can't perform at a level that men can perform at. We saw that this past year when again, the Women's World Cup was in the last time it was in Canada, then it comes into Europe. Again, it's the level of football is rising at a very high rate, and what it's showing is that it wasn't that there was any problem with women, that women weren't able to perform or play the sport. What it was showing is that women didn't have the opportunity, and now that women have the opportunity to play the sport, now the quality of sport is improving exponentially. And we see that in the United States with the number of women who play the sport, but all around the world. And if you look across sports, not just in women's soccer, but if you look into women's volleyball, or you look into all kinds of other sports, women's basketball, now that the opportunity is there, now that the chance to perform is there, now these women's sports levels, the quality of the sport is rising at an incredible rate. All right, so let's go back again and talk about another event that really shaped whether women were allowed to participate. And this is a very famous race. It was in the Olympics. It was the 800 meters, and I put this up as a story for you to read. The story that is out of one of the running magazines. But here's the story that came out in the newspaper after the 800 meters in the women's track and field in the Olympics in 1928. What you see here is that 5 women women track stars collapse in the Olympic race at the end of this 800 meters. And now everybody says, oh, the women shouldn't have to put themselves through this torture. They shouldn't be forced to do this because they all collapsed at the end of the race. The problem is this is factually inaccurate. There were none of the lead women collapsed at the end of the race, and you saw that in the paper that I had you read. So basically the first 3 athletes here, they all came in, they all finished ahead of the world record. The existing world record was broken by 3 people in one race. None of them collapsed. All of them were very tired. Everybody's going to be very tired at the end of that. And if you see 4th place is a Canadian, 5th place another Canadian, one of the Canadians was attempting to beat the other, stretched a little too far, collapsed on the race, got up after a couple of seconds. But nothing like this ever happened. And yet, right after this, women were barred from competing.